As climate change accelerates, it's turning one of our most essential resources, water, into a precious and increasingly scarce commodity. I'm Mike Walter, sitting in front of Naidu, and this is The Heat. Across the globe, extreme weather is putting unprecedented pressure on freshwater supplies, deepening inequality, driving people from their homes, and even sparking conflict. In Pakistan, torrential monsoon rains triggered deadly flash floods, killing more than 100 people and displacing thousands. The water came all at once and then disappeared just as quickly, leaving devastation in its wake. In the United States, Central Texas faced historic river flooding, the worst in almost 40 years, yet other parts of the country are parched, battling prolonged drought. And in Canada, France, Spain, and Syria, wildfires tore through bone-dry forests amid punishing heat waves, while rivers and reservoirs across the Middle East and South America continue to shrink. As the global water crisis escalates, could we see mass migration, instability, and a new era of water conflict? And how can the world respond before this vital resource runs dry? To discuss this and much more, let's bring in our first guest. Henk Ovink joins us from Rotterdam. He is the Executive Director and Founding Commissioner of the Global Commission on the Economics of Water. And we'll get to that title in just a moment. But Henk, I saw a video with you where you said water determines our past, our current, and our future. I think most of us are really interested in the current and the future. What is water telling us?
Yeah, what it's telling us, it's like the canary in the coal mine, some say. At the same time, it also tells us where the opportunities lie. On one end, we see the devastating impact of, as you already reported on, too much water, too little water, but also polluted water, all exacerbated by climate change. And that impact is undermining our future, but also our current situation of stability, development, energy security, food security, and so forth. If we continue on this path, this will only grow. With the Commission's report, we show that the impact of water scarcity will hit our economies in the next decades, in the global north to up to 10%, and in the global south to up to 15%, hampering food security as one of the key drivers for development, but also undermining energy security and development at large. So water, because it is connected to everything we value and want to achieve, is a critical natural resource that we've undervalued for way too long.
You mentioned undervalued. It's alarming what you just said. Is there a sense of urgency surrounding this issue in your estimation?
No, actually not. And the call to action in my former role as ambassador for water and lead for the UN 2023 Water Conference at the UN was the second time in the history of the United Nations that actually the world got together on water. The first was in 1977, so it took us 46 years. Water is not a priority with national governments, not with finance sector, and not with businesses. That is changing. Not because we value water so much, but because exactly the crises you've mentioned. And we have to, of course, turn that around, see water as an opportunity. Investing in water literally trickles down across everything in our society, our environment, and our economies. It creates equity, job opportunities, opportunities for the economy, and ensures that energy and food are secured forever. So water, while devastating and a deal breaker for the things that we want to achieve, now undermines exactly what can also be the catalyst for achieving our goals. And I think turning that around, turning water and seeing it as an asset, as an opportunity for coming together, working together, but also to securing those challenges on energy transition, on food security, on health, and on combating climate change is going to be the game changer the world so much is looking for.
Henk, in the introduction, we did the linkage of all the different issues going on globally. But when you watch the news, let's take Texas, for example, this terrible flood there, loss of life. It's one singular story. You don't see these weave together to tell a bigger story. Is that a problem?
Yeah, it's of course clear that in a super devastating, challenging situation like Texas, you focus on what happened and how to overcome that. The human and humanitarian stories of these disasters are, of course, key. But the importance is, and I think it's our collective responsibility, to look ahead. I've worked for the Obama administration post-Hurricane Sandy. I've worked around the world in post-disaster and conflict situations. And it's always the biggest challenge governments, communities, private sector, and financiers face. How can you not look back post the disaster and only band-aid your way forward, but literally look ahead and use that future as the opportunity for recovery, rebuilding, and anything that needs to come in place. And that's a challenge that the collective of society, and this is not government alone, have to get a way to deal with. Otherwise, we consistently are reactive in the context of all these disasters we're facing. And with that reactivism, we're only band-aiding ourselves to tomorrow, but it's not going to solve the systemic challenges and the systemic needs that we have as a society at large.
The needs, you mentioned the needs. Obviously, that's fueling the creation of the Global Commission on the Economics of Water. It was founded in 2022. Can you talk to us about the framework, why it was created, and also the title? It's an interesting title, talking about the economics of water.
Yeah, so the initiative came from the Netherlands, but it was inspired by two other economic reviews on climate and on biodiversity by Professor Stern and Professor Dasgupta. But contrary to those economic reviews, we said we need a larger perspective, a whole of society approach. So instead of tasking one scientist, we put together a group of scientists, politicians, academics, financiers, representatives from across the globe. So we have a youth activist and an activist in her 80s. We have politicians and researchers. Every continent, every generation is represented. And the Commission's task was to look really at how the water situation looks like, what is the current state of the water in the world, how it links to our ambitions, the Sustainable Development Goals as an anchor, and then what can we do? It should be a hopeful, we hoped, that was the ambition, that it can be in the context of the challenges a hopeful report, and we got there. One, the challenges of the water cycle are a little bit bigger than what we normally would address. Normally we would look at too much water, too little water, and polluted water in the environment. But you have to understand that water is a little bit more complex. It's not only that water evaporates from the rivers, streams, and the ocean. Water also transpires from biodiversity, from nature, from soil. So, and that transpiration is good for half of the rain on land. So that means when you cut it, to simplify, if you cut a train, you take away the source of rain. And this links water to our development, to land use, to the economy, and the way how we plan our society, and also changes the way how we look at how we damage actually the source of fresh water, not only by consuming too much and polluting the existing streams, also by destroying our biodiversity capital. And the combination of the two is undermining that security of water. And we found that fresh water is in decline while demand is going up in the relationship to all our issues on our economic challenges on food, energy, etc., as I already talked about. That is undermining our collective GDP. At the same time, if we look at that full hydrological cycle, so not looking only at water management, also at land management in their relationship to climate change, water presents us with the opportunity because it is linked to everything. The moment you start to invest in water, it trickles down into everything in our society. And that's when we came up with the vision and the ambition to address what it is that we could do. And we identified 5 missions, longer-term goals that bring together larger groups of society to focus on this mending this disbalanced hydrological cycle. And those missions are a food revolution, from changing diets to changing the subsidies and everything how we deal with water, working on biodiversity and land, the second. The third is on circular economy. The fourth is on the energy transition the world is facing and its relationship to AI and data and how these can be way less water intense. And the fifth, of course, is focused on health. Water pollution still one of the worst, but the worst impact on child mortality as well as on our global health situation. So those 5 missions are a collective ambition that, when achieved and when we all work on them, can help us restore the balance of the hydrological cycle, but also help us to achieve the goals that we set forward. And I think that's the important part. Water is a solution space. The hope we get from our findings, our report, but also the best practices around the world, that if we use water as this catalyst, we will be able to achieve many of our goals.
Well, you know, it's interesting. You threw out those initials, GDP, and that usually gets the attention of governments. You know, you start talking about the economics surrounding water. Is it good that the argument's been framed in that way, where you get maybe governments to look at this differently?
Yeah, I think we got the attention of government and the finance sector, but we also got the attention of the private sector. And I think in this collective, and nobody can do this alone. And we need communities, indigenous knowledge, we need women in the lead and the youth. We need, of course, government to play their role, private sector and financiers. And GDP works in that sense, the impact. But at the same time, we also showed how the value of water and nature and how we manage our land are of critical importance for the things we then often look at values, which are economic benefits. So it's beyond only a financial economic incentive. This is really about creating opportunities for society at large, combating inequality, giving the most vulnerable the place that they need and deserve. Listening to their needs will actually accelerate the opportunities also for the haves and the better offs. So it's a collective perspective that really puts inclusivity and justice in the center for sustainability, for resiliency, and for economic opportunity.
Henk, I'm here in Washington, D.C. You're obviously in Europe. I wanted to throw this question in your direction. The European Environment Agency came out with this report saying Europe is the fastest warming continent in the world. It's impacted by droughts, forest fires, heat waves, storms, and heavy rain. What is the situation on the ground there, and how alarming is it?
Yeah, like many places around the world, and you already alluded to that in the intro, the extremes are becoming more extreme, more floods, more droughts, longer periods of droughts, a bit stronger, and exactly in this, they can happen in the same time. And Europe is a bit of a petri dish of this. You see a confluence of those effects here, and we have to deal with them faster, bolder, and more collectively. The European Commission presented their water resiliency strategy a month ago, and that, together with the Green Deal and many other initiatives, really call for this way more ambitious agenda to do a combined effort on combating climate change, biodiversity loss, and water insecurity by looking at the full water cycle, looking at too much, too little, and the pollution of water in its relationship to health and our environment, to secure and ensure that that ambition that we put on the table with the Paris Agreement is not a paper ambition, but is felt as an intrinsic need for our society at large. And I think Europe also can't do this alone. Yeah, we need to work together with the world to ensure that what we invent here and put in place in policies and practices and programs and in innovations, society-led, can be replicated to other places around the world, but also that we learn from those places that are at the forefront where climate change is hitting, and that partnership and that collaboration inspires a global collective ambition that is way larger than we've seen over the last decade. After the Paris Agreement, we are lagging behind on its implementation, and that's a very boring statement, I know, but the inside of that, it shows that there are opportunities, and embarking on that opportunities, way more ambitious than we have seen. Water is at the center of that.
Henk Ovink, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. To continue our conversation, joining us from our newsroom is Saima Kadir. She is a member of the Advisory Board for Blue-Green Water Technologies in Oregon. Elliot Levine is the Senior Director of Climate and Water Security at Mercy Corps. And in Ontario, Kaveh Madani is the Director of the United Nations University Institute for Water, Environment, and Health, and that's where we're going to begin. Kaveh, A Forbes article said that water is both a victim and a driver of climate change, intricately linked to our survival. And I want to get your thoughts on that concept. And of course, Henk called it an amazing asset. It's interesting how we view water.
It's a very important issue. So water, yeah, we know water as a medium for highlighting the impacts of climate change. We know extreme floods, extreme droughts, so lack of water, plenty, or too much water at the times that we don't want them, and the melting of ice and snow and so on happens as a result of climate change. So that's one side of the story. It's the victim. But then on the other side of the story, which is extremely important and we don't talk much about, is whatever happens to these water systems, to the glaciers, to the snow, and the evaporation and so on, would also catalyze climate change. And that's one side of the story that makes water very, very special. That means that if we do something for water, do something for flood control, drought mitigation, and so on, we can fight climate change.
To that point, a researcher in Zurich had this to say about the issue.
So all the weather extremes that we're seeing are currently occurring in a warmer atmosphere and also with warmer oceans and in an atmosphere that can actually carry more moisture. So all these actually contribute to the fact that heat waves, as we've experienced them in the past, become more intense and obviously also more frequent. Heavy rainfall events can also be more intense because the atmosphere can carry more moisture. And interestingly, the same effect, the fact that the atmosphere can carry more moisture also implies that it can actually extract more moisture from the vegetation and from the surface, and therefore also may make droughts more intense.
So this, I think, is what you're getting at. All of these combinations, I don't think we think of it as it causes this, it causes that. All of these effects, talk to us about that.
So we are dealing with essentially a reinforcing loop that will make everything worse, and we have built our system based on a stationary assumption of nature. Like we are not certainly ready for the new normal or for the new mode of operations or function of the climate system. Human societies, infrastructure, everything were built based on what we knew, and now we are dealing with this new reality. And as we heard, the intensity, the duration, and frequency of the extreme events of all sorts are going to increase, and that will create extra pressure on our systems. We have dams that cannot tolerate and cope with the extra water that comes as a result of floods. We have, on the other side, we have some dams and reservoirs that would remain empty and that cannot generate power and satisfy the demand of farmers and cities and so on, because they won't get filled up. So this is, and then we cannot really build a new dam or raise the elevation or get rid of dams that easily. So that speaks to us how our infrastructure, our societies, our systems are not ready to deal with this new reality of extremes that would be more frequent and more serious.
Saima, you're talking about infrastructure, you're talking about governments and infrastructure. You and I had a chance to talk before we did the program, and you were talking about just looking at a map. You can look at a map and see serious concerns as you look into the future when it comes to water. Talk to us about that.
So infrastructure, especially in coastal areas, is going to get hit extremely hard with rising sea levels, but also the intensity, frequency of weather events that we're having. Our infrastructure is not built for that. So it's about looking to the future and building climate resilient infrastructure in addition to mitigating climate change. Water has a domino effect. It's not just a silo, but it's about volume of water and quality of water, how that's affected. So it's all kinds of infrastructure. Are you going to have clean drinking water? How is it going to affect your homes? How is it going to affect all your broader infrastructure?
And you also mentioned to me that rivers run through several countries, and sometimes there can be disputes about that when water is a scarcity.
Yeah, well, that's the biggest thing about water. Waters do not follow national boundaries. Water is ecosystems. Rivers tend to go through many countries. For example, China shares 110 rivers and lakes with 18 downstream countries, and most of the conflict is happening against the background of climate change, where we're having water scarcity, but also increased urbanization, increased human demand for water, competing domestic and cross-border uses for agriculture, industry, domestic use, and then you pile on the geopolitics, and it's very uneven in a sense that the upper riparian, that's the person who's at the head of the river, where the source of the river is, has disproportionate power and ability to impact communities who are downstream of you. And so it's very much, water must be managed as integrated transboundary water management with country cooperation. That's the only way to do it going forward in a climate change affected future.
Elliot, your organization obviously helps communities impacted by floods and droughts. Give us a sense of what we're seeing and how things have changed over recent years.
Yeah, happy to. So, at Mercy Corps, we're a humanitarian and development organization. So as you said, we're working directly with communities who are on the front lines of these water and climate related challenges that we're talking about right now. And in these places, water issues are one. I think it's important to understand that water issues are one of many challenges that communities are often dealing with. These can include a variety of these water issues like droughts and floods that we're talking about, but also these communities, these highly vulnerable communities, are dealing with other types of recent disasters, ongoing conflicts, possibly dealing with governments that aren't really serving the people or are acting in some oppressive way. So really what we have been seeing is water access and other challenges kind of coming together to exacerbate what we call incredibly fragile situations. And in those contexts, that's where it can lead to these heightened risks of conflict.
And Elliot, one area where you're working, which got a lot of attention worldwide, but has kind of fallen off the map, is of course Kabul in Afghanistan. About 6 million people live there. Your organization says that area is going to run out of water by 2030. What can be done to kind of stem that from happening, and just how serious a threat is that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a very, very serious threat. It's the reason we've been working so hard to get the word out about that report. I would say when it comes to solving problems like this, and certainly the issue in Kabul that we've talked about in this report is incredibly drastic. It represents one extreme side of the situation that Mercy Corps is dealing with when it comes to climate-induced water stress. But I would say across the board, when we're dealing with water stresses like this, particularly about scarcity, it's not just about solving a discrete problem, right? I mean, certainly we need to solve the problem itself, but it's also about restoring hope and dignity in these communities, supporting livelihoods, and giving people the tools to adapt to shifting water challenges that's changing with their climate. So Mercy Corps is doing a variety of different things, working with communities around the world on. So things like improving access to really critical early warning information or seasonal forecasts, helping communities of all sizes better manage their natural resources like water to make sure that the remaining resources they do have can go the furthest. We're working with governments from the national level all the way down to local government actors on how they can best serve their community in these times of stress. And certainly at the same time, we're working on peace-building initiatives to try really hard to cut off any rising conflict risks that might be coming about as a result of these problems.
Saima, he said we need to solve the problem. Blue-Green Water Technologies obviously wants to do that. What is that organization doing?
Absolutely. So Blue-Green Water Technologies has a very innovative technology to treat harmful algal blooms that are toxic to both human beings and other forms of life and to animals. It is one of the most cost-effective and also time-effective ways to optimize existing water use. Against the background of water scarcity, there's only so much we can do about water quality, availability of water, but it's about water quality and water being drinkable to optimize what you have. So by treating algal blooms, which are increasing in frequency all over the world precisely because of the warming temperatures of water that you talked about, you can extract additional water from what you already have to make it potable, to make it usable, and therefore hopefully reduce some of the political conflict and stress that comes from broader water scarcity.
Well, we all know Greece is surrounded by water, so it's obviously vitally important. Let's listen to what one researcher had to say about it.
The marine life is in equilibrium with the conditions, the temperature, salinity, everything of the Mediterranean Sea. And once one of these factors changes, in our case, the sea surface temperature, some species will not be able to reproduce or survive in these conditions, especially in increasing temperatures.
Can you talk about that? I think a lot of people don't think about certain communities and areas where they rely so much on the ocean, on water, for everything, and just changing that equilibrium has such a dramatic impact on their lives.
Water is life. I mean, it's as simple as that, and it has a domino effect if you change one thing on your energy security, your food security, your physical safety, your infrastructure security. But I really like the fact that you talked about what are essentially called tipping points and thresholds beyond temperatures and water salinity that's also being affected by climate change because of glacial melt, that life, different kinds of life needs different conditions that they cannot live within. And especially in a place like Greece, it's also about food security from marine life. So that's an extremely important threshold. It's not just about GHG levels, but also about not hitting those thresholds beyond which life cannot survive.
We all know what it looks like right now, but what does the future look like? Let's listen to what one researcher had to say about that. I want to get your reaction on the other side.
By 2050, years like this will be average, and by 2100, years like this will actually be cool. And we're going to see more temperature extremes and also more rainfall extremes in the future too. So that's clearly of concern.
It's clearly a matter of concern. Just give us a view of what are we looking at right now, and what does it look like in the future, and what should we be doing right now to mitigate that?
So, this is one of those times that I really hope that we are wrong and the future would be better than our projections, and hopefully we have made a mistake in projecting the future. But at least this is what science tells us, and that's what we're warning the world about. That the future is nothing like this. That some of the extremes that we are seeing today are not going to be extremes anymore. Last year alone, in the number of extreme events, climate events we saw last year was 2 times bigger than the average we had seen in the first 2 decades of this century. So the future is something that if continues to, if we don't take any action right now, the future would be catastrophic. We don't know which nations would survive. We know that some vulnerable communities within some nations, and some nations out of the countries around the world that are poor, that are geographically disadvantaged when it comes to climate change, might be even wiped out of the map. And the best prediction of the future is building it and enabling it. If we want to avoid that catastrophic future, we have to take actions today. We have to get our act together to mitigate climate change. We have to bring nations back to the negotiations. The current world order, the conflicts, wars, and everything have created a big distraction from climate change. We have made a lot of promises, but we haven't delivered on them. And unless we change that course, we are not going to, be able to avoid that catastrophe.
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. We want to thank all of you for joining us. A great discussion, and we are going to leave it there. I'm Mike Walter in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for watching another edition of The Heat.